Hey there, Chrononauts! Welcome to the Adventure Guide for Time Travelers visiting the Nika Revolt. I'm Nova, and I'm here with Horatio to help you get all set for your visit to 532 AD in Constantinople, capital city of the Byzantine Empire.
That's right, Nova. Chrononauts taking this trip should be prepared for a full 9-day journey to the past. In this jump, you will get to witness a quarter of one of the largest cities of the time burned down and an emperor briefly deposed, all kicked off by a sports riot.
A sports riot, can you imagine? Horatio, walk us through the sports atmosphere of the Byzantine Empire.
The sports scene in Constantinople was all about chariot racing. Races were an all-day event with both morning and afternoon events, and a circus act in between. Often the emperor would hold a feast for lunch so that people could stay all day. The hippodrome, where the races occurred, was about 450 meters long and 130 meters wide. It could hold about 100,000 spectators in its U shape. While you are there, take the time to explore the various statues and tapestries that line the arena, since most of them did not survive the centuries and crusades. The city of Constantinople at that time was estimated to be about 500,000 people. The hippodrome could accommodate 20% of the city's population, showing how popular the games were to the Byzantines.
Make sure during your first day you take the time to enjoy the races, since they will be put on hold during the riots.
Another interesting feature of the hippodrome was the emperor's private box, where the emperor, his family, and any other high-ranking official could come and watch the races. His private box was linked to the palace by a tunnel, but when he was there, he was visible to the crowd.
That might be the reason why this sports riot was more than just a sports riot. Some historians think that by the time, the racing teams had become a sort of proto-political party system. If this is true, it's likely because the hippodrome was a place where the populace had access to the emperor. Shouting en masse was a powerful way to get a message to him, and to show him how widely supported the message was. If 20% of the city could get together in one spot and shout the same thing at the emperor, something might be done about it.
As a traveler, please refrain from altering or influencing any political slogans for fear of causing ripples in time, though participating in their chants is encouraged to get a feel of what it's like.
When you arrive at the hippodrome, you will notice that the spectators will be divided up into the 4 racing teams. Most people will be there supporting either the blues or the greens, but the red and white teams still had some fans. People became fanatical supporters of their team and even wore the team colors outside of the races, the same way people today wear jerseys. So go ahead and wear the team colors at the races and even outside the hippodrome. Though Chrononauts Incorporated cannot be held liable for any injuries sustained from rival teams.
These teams would buy, sell, and trade drivers and crew, and teammates work together on strategies. This would look familiar to how professional racing teams would operate today. Keep an eye on the drivers in between races. Drivers would change chariots and horses between the morning and afternoon races to make sure it was known to the spectators that it was their skill that won the race and not the equipment. One of the theories is that racing fans started to divide themselves into colors based on their political leanings. The blues represented the ruling class and absorbed the white team over time. The greens, who absorbed the reds, represented the people. By the time of Justinian, your choice in racing teams was more than which team you liked, it was also a representation of your political views.
Like how Philadelphia Flyers fans embrace chaos and anarchism?
I don't think that's the thing.
Tell that to Gritty.
Anyways, the other important piece of the backstory is what was going on with the taxes and laws at that time. When Justinian became emperor, he inherited the Iberian War with the Byzantine Empire from his uncle Justin. This had been a long and costly war for both sides, and because of this, Justinian had to raise funds to pay for the war. The person he leaned on to do this went by the name of John of Cappadocia. At the beginning of Justinian's rule, John helped Justinian rewrite and condense the legal code. John and another administrator by the name of Tribonian reworked the legal code, which they called the Corpus Juris Civilis. This upset a lot of the wealthy elite of the empire.
By the time of Justinian, there were over 200 years of legal codes, and it was impossible for anyone to know all of them, so there were a lot of loopholes or ways to hold people accountable for things they couldn't know about, which a lot of wealthy people were happy to take advantage of.
Justinian had made John his chief legal advisor, and he was appointed to Praetorian Prefect of the East. This gave John the power to introduce new taxes, and in order to recoup some of the financial losses due to the war, John introduced at least 26 new taxes that largely fell on the wealthy.
That's a lot of legal changes going on in a short time. No wonder people were starting to get stirred up.
So when exactly will our travelers be starting?
We'll drop you off on January 10th, just in time for the first riot that starts the chain of events leading to the revolt. The first 4 days of your trip, the political tensions will have you feeling like you're sitting in a simmering pot. The next 5 will be a rolling boil.
Because the Hippodrome was a forum to show their discontent to the emperor, the Blues and Greens were arguing about the new taxes at the chariot races. Even though Justinian considered himself a Blue, he did not think it was proper for an emperor to show too much support for one team. On the day you arrive, the Blues and Greens will erupt into fighting over the new taxes. This fighting turns into a riot that spills into the streets. Tensions had been running high for a while, and in the several weeks preceding this, there were already a few smaller riots where a few people had died. These smaller riots were on the same scale as our modern-day sports riot, similar to the 2011 riot in Vancouver during the Stanley Cup final. To quell this latest small riot, Justinian sent in his troops. He wanted to be clear that these riots needed to stop, so he had his troops round up the leaders of both sides. They were able to arrest 7 of the leaders. In order to send a message to the rioters, they sentenced them to be hanged. They took them to the Sikai, which was one of the suburbs of Constantinople. The first 5 men were successfully hanged, but when it got to the last 2 men, 1 blue and 1 green, the gallows broke. The people saw this as a sign from God that these men should be spared. The crowd watching the hanging pushed past Justinian's troops, freed the 2 men, and rushed them to a nearby church where they would receive sanctuary, since the military was not permitted to forcibly enter a church.
For the next 3 days, go enjoy the baths of Zeuxippus and the Hagia Sophia to see them before they get destroyed. This is the second iteration of the Hagia Sophia, as the first was burned down during a whole different set of riots in 404 AD. Now would also be a good time to stock up on souvenirs, which you can store in your time pocket travel bag for safekeeping.
On the 13th of January, there is another chariot race at the Hippodrome. However, this time, the Greens and Blues were united for the first time. Both sides asked Justinian to show mercy to the 2 survivors. However, Justinian gave no response, and by the 22nd race, someone called out, "Long live the humane Greens and Blues." Now the united crowd started chanting Nika, Nika, or victory, victory.
This was a common chant to yell out in support of the chariot teams, usually Nika Green or Nika Blue, but this time it was directed towards Justinian himself, as the crowd was cheering for their victory over him.
The Hippodrome once again erupted into violence, but this time, instead of taking it out on each other, the factions attacked the city. The violence once again spilled into the streets. The rioters burned down the Praetorium, their version of a police station, and freed the prisoners inside. The fire continued to spread to more of the city. The first major loss in the fire were the baths of Zeuxippus.
The baths were built at the founding of the city by Constantine, and filled with statues and mosaics from all over the known world.
Next, the fires burned down the Hagia Sophia. Over the next 5 days, the fire and rioting continued, burning down over 25% of Constantinople. The fire brigades that would have tried to put out the fires were run off by the rioters.
Justinian was trapped in his palace, protected by his imperial guard, who only had the numbers to protect the palace and not much else. He wanted to come to a peaceful resolution with the rioters. At first they demanded that Tribonian and John of Cappadocia were to be dismissed. Justinian agreed to this and released the 2 from his employ. Then they demanded that he remove the new taxes. Once again, Justinian agreed.
By this point, some of the senators saw an opportunity to get rid of Justinian altogether and convinced the rioters to demand Justinian abdicate. This, Justinian refused.
When the riots broke out, Justinian and his family were locked away in the palace, along with the Senate and 3 brothers who were the nephews of Anastasius, who was the emperor just before Justinian's predecessor, Justin. As the riots grew in intensity, one of the brothers fled the city. Eventually, Justinian, fearing a betrayal, expelled the Senate and the remaining 2 brothers from the palace. Pay attention to this dude, he's going to cause some problems for Justinian coming up.
5 days into the riots, when Justinian refused to abdicate the throne, the mob started to look for his replacement. They found Hypatius.
See?
One of the brothers kicked out of the palace, hiding under his bed at home. They dragged him to the hippodrome as his wife was pleading with them to stop. Hypatius was reluctant at first to take actions against Justinian because he and his brothers, although they have a claim to the throne, were well taken care of by the emperors Justin and then Justinian, and they didn't have a lot of support in the Senate for a coup. After being brought to the hippodrome, however, Hypatius did go along with the crowd crowning him emperor.
And Chrononauts, let me tell you, if you want to see a guy completely change his disposition in a short time, just make sure to be in the audience when Hypatius gets crowned.
Yeah, I hear he went from hiding to emboldened as soon as he saw the crowds cheering for him.
With the riots going on for days and a new emperor crowned, Justinian feared for his life. He decided that he was going to flee the city and collect troops to bring back with him to quell the rebellion. This is where his wife Theodora stepped in and potentially saved his life, his reign, and maybe even the empire. Historians have claimed a lot of different versions of what she said to him exactly, but they all have the same general gist. If you, my lord, wish to save your skin, you will have no difficulty in doing so. We are rich, there is the sea, there are our ships. But consider first whether, when you reach safety, you will regret that you did not choose death in preference. As for me, I stand by the ancient saying, the purple is the noblest winding sheet.
Purple there refers to the color of royalty, and so she's basically saying dying as an emperor is the most noble way. And by the way, if you manage to get a spot in the palace where you get to hear her speech, please make sure to record it with your covert amulet camera.
Theodora was hugely influential throughout Justinian's reign. She came from what they considered undesirable lineage. She was the daughter of a bear tamer and an actress. She herself was an actress, which possibly meant in those days that she was also a sex worker.
In fact, in order to marry Theodora, Justinian had to convince his uncle Justin, who was emperor at the time, to change the 200-year-old law that prohibited anyone from senatorial rank or above from marrying an actress.
As empress, she had some truly remarkable laws passed protecting the rights of women and particularly of sex workers. But of course they weren't exactly passing many laws during the revolt. Please submit a request in the comments if you're interested in a trip that would allow you to learn more about Theodora and her legal work.
Now that Justinian was convinced to stay and fight, he came up with a plan with two of his generals who were in the palace at that time, Belisarius and Narcisse. The first part of the plan was to send Narcisse by himself, unarmed, into the hippodrome. He brought with him a large sum of gold. He went to the members of the blue faction and reminded them, with a little gold, that the emperor was always one of them. The new emperor, Hypatius, was a green and would never be on their side. Narcisse was trying to create a wedge between the blues and the greens. As this was going on, Belisarius would collect his troops, which were waiting outside the city, since generals don't enter a city with their troops in order not to come off as hostile. They are mostly made up of Goths, Heruls, and Thracians, all foreign troops who were loyal to him and not either the blues or the greens. Belisarius only had about 1,500 troops with him as he entered the packed hippodrome. Even though they were vastly outnumbered, they were professional soldiers with proper equipment against 100,000 rioters in the stadium. Once they entered, they started attacking blues and greens indiscriminately. In the panic of the attack, people tried to flee and many were trampled in the exits. In the end, it is estimated about 30,000 people were killed in the stadium, which was about 10% of the total population of Constantinople. Hypatius and the other ringleaders were rounded up in the attack. Justinian wanted to show Hypatius mercy, but Theodora convinced him that he needed to show strength and have Hypatius executed. With the riot quelled, a quarter of the city burned down, 30,000 people had died, and now Justinian had to rebuild. Because of his actions and the way he was able to quash the riot, he cemented his power in the eyes of the people and the Senate.
The very first thing Justinian did was to renege on all the promises he made to the rioters, reinstating John of Cappadocia and Tribonian and bringing back the taxes.
Right away he began work on rebuilding the Hagia Sophia, which is the version we have today. Since the chariot races had become such a hotbed of political dissent, and this was the worst riot but not close to the first, he decided to ban all chariot racing for the next 5 years. Within the next few months, he was also able to come to a peace treaty over his inherited Iberian War with his Persian rival, Anushirvan, known as the Perpetual Peace.
Justinian had to pay 11,000 pounds of gold to Persia. Using some of this money, Anushirvan built his own hippodrome in his capital city. He even imported a lot of the Byzantine racing teams to host his own chariot races, and he declared himself a supporter of the Greens as a taunt to Justinian.
Safe travels through time, Chrononauts, and keep on ticking.